Koyan naming Moses kuno yung atik bay mi tatlunga. Tapani katike yung nakasari na tamatuming unikastid luta. Tayo na ukaw sa kawya si paunga ura sa remudlu. Ikaluktu tiya mudunan mo tayo kuno nga idlisi.
I think it was in Resolute Bay or in Cambridge Bay with regard to permafrost. There was some kind of research being done. And I have thinking that perhaps some communities, the smaller ones, for example, are not given any, or there's no research in those smaller communities. Like, for example, we go out hunting for whales in the summertime, and we tend to have shorter periods to go hunting. So our window of opportunity for hunting is shorter time. We're finding that this is changing, and the minister was here earlier. I really wanted to express it to him because it might be directed to him more. So there was some research. Sometimes we tend to disagree about the types of research. For example, when they're tagging them or collaring them, there tend to be a lot of deaths, and we tend to disagree as Inuit to have that kind of research being done to wildlife. And the ice, we're finding it's a lot thinner now, and we tend to find that as a harvester, we tend to find seal that they're during the winter months, they would have a tendency to have finer fur, and they'd be fatter and healthier. But I'm finding that they tend to have anomalies in their skin, and whenever we open up the seal, they tend to have certain problems that we're finding in the seal. I'm just wondering if there could be research done on the problems or maybe perhaps contaminants that are being found with the wildlife in some of our communities, and the fact that some of our communities are finding that they don't have ice forming like they used to, and there's more longer open water. So I'm finding that in Pond Inlet, for example, there's a place there, and then there was a fellow there that moved to Pond Inlet. He was originally from Germany, and I'm wondering if there was some research done by him. I'm sure historically there's some documents somewhere that he had done his observations about the ice, and I'm wondering if that could be used as a to observe what's been happening now, to find out more. And my thinking is that if there could be more research. And I'm finding that the sun has tilted more to a certain direction. We're finding that the higher Arctic regions, I find the sun is rising more above, in a higher location above the horizon. We're finding this, and we find the wind directions from the north, or it's coming from a different direction more. I'm sorry, I'm going to be long, so I'll just end there for now. Thank you.
Nami.
Thank you. Any one of you can respond. If you don't want to all individually speak, that's fine too.
Thanks for the question. In regards to research on seals, the Northern Contaminants Program has been working with many communities looking at different seal issues. There was a workshop last year here in Healey for looking at the different issues with ring seal specifically. A lot of other questions came up about bearded seal and other seals, but they're still trying to figure out what's happening to their skins and to the conditions inside them. They don't know if it's just contaminants or if it's a change in the food they're eating and the new competition that they have in the water, like other animals. As for expanding research, The wildlife research, a lot of it's done with the government in Nunavut, so I won't be able to answer that specifically, but NTI is very aware of issues that Inuit have with collaring and interfering with wildlife. And Policy was here earlier. He's the expert. If you have questions about that with him, he'll be happy to talk with you. And that's it from me. Thank you for the good questions.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Andrew was saying, I know NTI are often involved in consultations or giving some advice on various programs like NCP, Northern Contaminants Program, and the government of Nunavut also. And just on behalf of sort of the group that I work within, the Climate Change Secretariat, we're always really keen to know sort of what areas of knowledge you'd like to have filled, like if there's very specific kinds of research that you feel or questions that you have, and if you think that they're linked with climate change or any changes in your environment. We're very much, as I mentioned, we work with lots of different organizations and also a lot of scientists, and we're often almost bombarded with so many requests from scientists from down south who want to come up and who want to help and find answers, but they're not really sure what questions people want answered. So I really encourage you, don't hesitate to contact Department of Environment or directly me or any of my team at the Climate Change Secretariat at any time, and let us know if you have these questions, because we can also field them to our other colleagues over at the federal government and even NTI, and we do our best to work together to try and find answers to questions, and then to share that knowledge too more broadly so that other communities have that information. I didn't have a chance to mention too, but we do have, I know lots of people aren't necessarily always on internet or don't always even have very good access to it, but the Nunavut Climate Change Secretariat does have a website, climatechangenunavut.ca, and it's on cards out by the front desk. So if you are ever looking for maybe research that was done in your community, you can go to the website and just click on your community, and there'll be a list of any reports that we've received that had to do with climate change research. And if you think that there maybe was research done in your community but it's not available on there, you just let us know and we'll find out who the scientists were and make sure that your communities have access to that information. Because it's a big part of what we do is trying to make sure that communities have information and they know what research is going on in their backyard, especially anything to do with climate change. So yes, thanks.
Today, with pollution in the air, we find clouds from heavens that actually descend to the ground level. And we have observed that even new cover of snow is not completely white snow anymore as well. Perhaps should we worry about our health because you have the animals feeding on the ground and so forth. So I would suggest research done on the snow that accumulates up in the north.
Yeah, that's something that's been noted for quite some time, and I know one of the explanations for that dark matter that's like almost like a light dirt that's settling on snow across the Arctic, across circumpolar Arctic, it's becoming a bigger issue. And I know within Arctic Council, it's something that they're looking at across many nations, and it's called black carbon, or black carbon is part of it. And it comes from China and India and these other industrialized nations where they're creating a lot of air pollution, and then it's being brought over to our areas. And so, and that's where, a lot of the work that we do across governments, across all of our organizations, is to make sure that we're pushing, not just within Canada, but also internationally, to make sure that the industrial activities that are maybe happening on the other side of the globe are being reduced, so that Inuit in the Arctic, in Canada, and even elsewhere in the circumpolar Arctic are not going to feel the impacts of it as much. And as the minister said earlier too, global greenhouse gas emissions, the air pollution that's being caused by use of diesel, that's mostly not being produced by Inuit or even in Nunavut, but we're feeling the impacts of it more than anyone else. And so, and that's why it's really important that the work we do is not just here in Nunavut, but also broadly. And so that's why, the government of Nunavut and NTI were both attended the United Nations meetings back earlier in the fall to voice these concerns and to share the knowledge and the concerns that people in Nunavut have. But yes, thanks for your question, and it's definitely something we'll keep pushing for to get more information and answers.
As for the clouds being lower and the snow being different, as the temperature warms up, it has a better ability to hold more moisture. And so the clouds get a little bit heavier and the snow changes even when it's falling from a different kind of snow. But I'm not an expert in weather, but that's usually one of the reasons why the clouds come lower. It's a bigger cloud, heavier cloud, more water from the warmer air.
Lodi.
Lodi Palu here. Going back to what we saw earlier, there were some notes taken on global warming and research that have been done from 2008, 2016, and what changes are occurring in our climate. I guess the time I was involved in one meeting, we learned about how some peoples are affected by the sun, and how people who have sensitive skin are affected by the change. With increased ill health, or when climate impacts start affecting people, what should be observed? Is there remedies for potential problems? And most people up here don't use sunblock cream, but in reading the information that was given to us, as he just said, in some of the notes in there, it mentions that what impact climate change can have on our bodies, our health, and it seems to coincide with increase in cancer up here. Perhaps the question should be, is it already affecting Inuit physically? And if it has, what should we?
Yeah, so I don't have the answer to the question in terms of what are the impact, but that's specifically why there's a health portion of the climate change adaptation that was funded and is going to continue to be funded. So either the cloud or the sun, and what are the impact on the health? Those are the type of questions that can be funded through the funding that is available at Health Canada, and when it touches the impact on health and human being, and also what are the different ways that we can prevent or adapt to the change and what's happening. Those are two pieces that are well within that the funding parameters. And if things are going broader than just the impact on health, then this is where some of the other funding from INAC or other partners can come in. And that's how we can build better projects that are more holistic in their approaches. So those two questions, it's really good to have them raised up here today, because we're recording all of the discussion in terms of seeing what are the different issues that are raised, and this is going to feed into the discussion moving forward in terms of where the investment is going to go. So thank you very much for raising those 2 points.
Kuyanamik, Charlie.
Great. I have two questions. They're quite long, however. The first question, perhaps if I may comment first. When we talk about receding ice or melting of ice everywhere, in the States, last year I believe, when we visited the States, we listened to the climate change conference from scientists from all over, and we participated. Myself and an interpreter attended the conference, and discussions involved many different species of wildlife and seals, and we also visited many locations. And we saw miniature carvings of people and animals, and in that conference, Dorset people were mentioned that this is reality now in Iqaluit because of climate change. This is the situation in Iqaluit. But I've never heard of these until I attended the conference down there. And many of the information were also known in places like Labrador and Greenland. Greenland delegates presented same stories. So when I came back, I began to ask, where are the indigenous Inuit who have participated in these discussions? Because in the conference I asked, do you meet with Inuit? Because you're dealing with seals, you're dealing with wildlife. But none of the delegates ever involved themselves in that. So I asked further to Canadian government, and same response was given, that there's none. And I asked Nunavut government, are they involved? Are they part of the planning? And none. I asked NTI while they're discussing climate change and what strategies have been developed. None. So to me, I felt very uncomfortable about it in view of our people. Because climate change is often used to scare people. For example, scare tactics from wildlife groups that bears are disappearing, and many use it as a means for something. And recently, are we going to continue in this situation? Because the issue we're discussing is very important. So, as I just said an example, this is what I did in the conference. So if you're going to discuss Arctic issues in big conferences, yes, visit those communities that you talk about. I think after I spoke in the conference, people wanted to shy away from me. But for those of us who attended the conference, I could say we've never participated in these research. And so I would suggest perhaps elected officials or people of knowledge attend such meetings as well. I think a response will be given. But we need to start strategizing, and I've thought of our MOAs, and perhaps inform the Canadian government. Okay, let's have people participate. Yes, you're discussing receding of ice, but we need to be fully involved. Perhaps this is so dear to me because I was a former mayor. The other question on research, it was mentioned earlier that the Canadian government erected a building, a research station in Cambridge Bay, and it will be moving ahead. And the Hamlet received a letter saying that it talked about research for young people, as an example. So I felt hesitant, and I was also talking to some senators, and I received a call. What are your plans for the future? We discussed when I asked, why are you asking this? It was mentioned to me that once the research station in Cambridge Bay is completed, research will flourish in the north. So you'll have even more research going on. In Pond, there's a small research station and some other places. But going back to the senators who mentioned that we have a resident now from Iqaluit who now heads the research station in Cambridge Bay, and it was mentioned that we need to have an Inuk who is fully knowledgeable directing the new research center. But to his comment upon the research station being completed, it may just be too big, for the reason that many projects outlined there's research and the satellites images are being used to seek mineral resources in the Arctic. And that's going to be the major thing in the research. And the research goes hand in hand too with environmental research, with mobilization of a lot of fuel for research sites. And in Pond Inlet, in one of our meetings, let's put a pause to such research and ask a question to the Canadian government and whether there is support or not. But the Canadian government, the Prime Minister, have agreed that research should go ahead fully in Nunavut. So we have many potential funders around the world. And there'll be people who will be approaching that they want to conduct a particular research. And I've thought of the senators who may not have much influence anymore in policies, because global leaders will begin to dictate. And that will be the case with Nunavut if we're not prepared as Nunavut government. So we need to have full participation. And that's the point of my comment, that participation is very important. Thank you.
So I cannot speak to all the research that the Government of Canada is leading, but in terms of climate change adaptation, we're working closely with Polar Knowledge. They will be part of feeding into our Northern Adaptation Strategy, and we'll make sure that that they work with us on the implementation. And within our programs at INAC, we're making sure to have these sessions, to have this input, to have these discussions with Inuit, to make sure that we're really addressing and targeting the right areas and directing our funding to the right place. But we're not directly funding researchers. We're funding communities. The funding goes to the communities, and they select the people they want to work with. So it's research identified by the people and not by the researchers. So we're slowly trying to change our ways of doing things to address these very concerns.
NTI agrees with your comments about polar bears and a lot of people using the situation to their advantage for fundraising or other issues. We're very much aware that the communities are talking about seeing more and more bears and them becoming more and more of a problem for communities and for safety. We even had to cancel Halloween in Nunavut. With the science and the reasoning behind that is not really science. It's a lack of understanding about a polar bear life cycle. There is evidence and proof that the sea ice is receding and it's becoming less stable. But the rest of the world seems to think that polar bears only hunt from ice and can't survive off of anything but seals only from the ice. So at NTI, there was a campaign a couple years ago, We Are Okay, and there was some information produced about it and policies here from Wildlife Department, and we're well aware of those issues, and it's a lot of, it would take a lot of response to address each time they do that, but when we go to conferences and we speak to researchers and scientists, we let them know that they have a lack of understanding of the complete polar bear life cycle, and they have no idea what they're eating. Like last year, they're freaking out that polar bears are eating eggs, polar bears are eating caribou, and they're eating berries. This is unheard of, and we all know that polar bears will eat what they can eat, and so we get a lot of, we know the ice is receding, and they seem to think that because of that there's nowhere for them to live. So it's really annoying, and it's quite concerning that the whole world seems to follow on this without having an understanding of it.